The nurse said, "Mrs. Hart, your ride isn't here yet." I smiled softly, though I already knew. My daughter and her husband had left hours ago, after handling the bill. They handled it all right. They left me sitting in a hospital gown, with nothing but discharge papers and a silence heavy enough to last a lifetime. But that day, I didn't cry. Because there was something they didn't know. My name is Evelyn Hart, and I'm 68 years old. I used to believe family always comes back for you, that love once given protects you from being forgotten. But life has a way of testing gentle hearts. A few months ago, I walked out of a hospital with nothing left to my name. What came next wasn't revenge. It was a lesson, one they'd remember for the rest of their lives. The hallway was quiet that morning. Soft sunlight touched the floor tiles, and I sat at the edge of the bed, already dressed, holding my discharge papers. The nurse, Bailey, smiled kindly. "Mrs. Hart, your ride isn't here yet," she said. Her voice was gentle, like someone afraid to say the wrong thing. She tried calling again, but I could hear the tone in her voice before she turned around. No answer. It went to voicemail. I nodded slowly. My daughter Lena and her husband Mark had promised to pick me up after handling the bill. They'd done it before. But this time, something in my chest told me they weren't coming back. Bailey looked at the computer screen. "It says the payment is pending," she said. "They told admitting it was covered, but there's no card on file." I stared at the window. "That's all right," I said quietly. "Please call me a cab." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" "You can stay a little longer, I'm sure." I slipped my feet into my shoes. My bag was gone. Lena had taken it to make things easier tomorrow. I almost smiled at the irony. My coat was gone, too. I had brought everything I thought I'd need. Turns out, what I needed most wasn't in that bag. I signed the last paper. My handwriting looked steady, calm. "There you go," I said. She handed me an envelope with my documents, heavy with the weight of all that had changed. "Do you want to wait in the lounge?" she asked. "No, by the window is fine." Outside, the morning light was sharp and clean. I could see people rushing to work, cars moving, life continuing as if nothing unusual had happened. I remembered when Lena was little, sitting on the porch steps, braiding my hair and humming. I had thought moments like that lasted forever. The phone line clicked. "Your cab will be here in 15 minutes, the dispatcher said. Bailey lingered near the door. "Should I call your daughter one more time?" "Not today," I said softly. "She's probably busy." "Busy forgetting me," I almost added, but some words don't need saying. I took one last look at the reflection in the window. A tired woman stared back, hair grayer than she remembered, but eyes clear. "They've taken me home before," I whispered to her, "but not this time." The hospital doors opened automatically. Outside, cool air met my skin. A family walked in, a grandmother in a wheelchair, her daughter pushing her, a small boy holding balloons. He smiled at me. I smiled back. It felt like sunlight. The cab waited by the curb. "Call if you need anything," Bailey said, squeezing my hand. "I will," I lied politely. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. I gave him my old address just to hear it out loud. Then I corrected myself and gave him the address of the small room I had rented near the hospital. I had kept it just in case. As we drove, the city slowly woke. Streetlights blinked off one by one. I looked out the window, thinking about my house, the tree outside the kitchen window, the stairs that creaked on the third step. Mark had said repairs were too expensive. Maybe that's why he took my house keys, too. I rested the envelope on my lap. Inside were my papers, proof of who I was, and maybe who I'd been before I became someone's afterthought. I traced the edge of it with my thumb. The cab stopped outside a narrow apartment building. "Want me to wait?" the driver asked. "No," I said. "Thank you." The door to my small rented room stuck before it opened. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I set the envelope on the table and sat down. The chair creaked but held steady, just like me. They left me at the hospital. That was a fact. But facts can change their shape depending on who tells the story. I looked out the small window. The city was alive again, cars, voices, sunlight pushing through the clouds. I took a breath. "They've handled the bill," I whispered, and smiled faintly. "Now it's my turn." I picked up the envelope, opened it, and began to read. The papers blurred for a moment. My eyes weren't failing me. It was just that my thoughts had wandered somewhere softer. The smell of the hospital faded, and in its place came the warm scent of home. Lemon cake, fresh soil, and Thomas's aftershave. I used to wake before the sun. The house would still be wrapped in that blue morning quiet. I'd fill the kettle and listen to it hum while the first light slipped through the curtains. My kitchen was small, but every inch of it had a memory, the wooden spoon with a crack down the middle, the apron Emma had painted on for Mother's Day, the teapot Thomas bought me when we couldn't afford much, saying, "Good mornings deserve good tea." Back then, life was simple and full. I'd water my plants, open the windows, and let the air move through the rooms. The curtains would flutter like they were breathing. Sometimes I'd hum a hymn while I worked. Nothing fancy, just a quiet tune to fill the space. After breakfast, I'd walk through the garden. My knees complained every step, but I never minded. The roses were worth it. I talked to them like friends, thanked them when they bloomed. People laugh when you say you talk to flowers, but when you live alone long enough, silence answers back anyway. Emma loved the garden too. She'd come running from the car, shoes already muddy before she reached me. "Grandma, can I pick one?" she'd ask, and I'd pretend to hesitate before handing her the biggest rose in sight. She'd tuck it behind her ear, smiling like the whole world was hers. I'd bake when she visited, banana bread or peach cobbler. She'd sit on the counter, swinging her legs while I mixed the batter. "Mom says too much sugar isn't healthy," she'd whisper, grinning. "Don't tell her," I'd say, slipping her a spoonful anyway. Those were our little rebellions, sweet, harmless, and full of love. When Lena and Mark came by, I always wanted everything perfect, the good plates, the fresh flowers, the house spotless. I'd cook Mark's favorite stew, though he rarely finished it. He'd talk about market opportunities and timing investments, words that filled the air like smoke. I didn't always understand, but I smiled, nodded, and refilled his glass. Lena would scroll through her phone, saying she was checking emails. I told myself that's what busy people did. They meant well, I thought. They were building their lives. I didn't want to be a burden, so whenever they hinted at money troubles, I offered help before they had to ask. "You've done enough, Mom," Lena would say. But she'd still take the check, and I'd still write it, telling myself that's what love looked like when you got older. Quiet, practical, no questions asked. My world revolved around simple routines. Church on Sundays, casseroles for the neighbors when they fell sick, and knitting scarves for the winter fundraiser. Mrs. Keene from across the street said I had a giving heart. Maybe I did, but truthfully, I just didn't know how to say no to anyone who needed me. At night, after the dishes were done and the lights were dim, I'd sit by the living room window. That was Thomas's chair before it was mine. I could still picture him there, reading the paper, clearing his throat before saying, "Evie, the world's gone mad again." I'd laugh and tell him to let the world sort itself out. He'd wink and say, "It will, because you're in it." Sometimes I wonder what he'd say now. Would he tell me I'd given too much? That kindness needs boundaries? He used to believe people learned through mistakes. I used to believe love could fix them. Maybe we were both half right. The papers on the table rustled as a breeze came through the cracked window. I blinked, the memory slipping back into the present. My little rented room looked nothing like that house, but for a moment I could almost hear the floor creak under Thomas's steps, smell the stew simmering on the stove, and feel Emma's hand tugging mine. That life had been mine once, gentle, full of meaning. Every act, every kindness was a seed I planted with faith that it would grow in the hearts of the people I loved. But faith, I learned, can wither too if it's not watered back. I looked at the stack of papers again, the bills, the hospital forms, the signatures. Proof that love, to some people, has an expiration date. Still, I didn't regret any of it. I just wished they'd remembered how it all began, how every comfort they had was built from the small sacrifices I never counted. The kettle on the stove whistled in my memory, soft and familiar. I almost smiled. The world had changed, yes, but I still knew who I was. As I stood and closed the window, I whispered quietly, "Tomorrow I'll plant again." Because even after betrayal, gardens grow. The days after the hospital passed quietly. I told myself to rest, to let things settle, but silence has a way of revealing what you try hardest to ignore. I still called Lena every evening, the way I always had. At first, she answered, her voice warm but hurried. "Mom, I'm just in the middle of something. Can I call you later?" she'd say. Later rarely came. I tried not to take it personally. People get busy, I reminded myself. I had been busy once, too, when Thomas and I were building our lives, when every dollar mattered and every evening felt too short. But something about her tone stayed with me. There was distance where there used to be laughter. Mark was the next to call. His words came coated with concern, but carried a chill underneath. "You shouldn't be alone so much, Evelyn. It's not safe. There are good assisted living places near us, great staff, beautiful rooms." He said it like he was offering a gift, but the way he lingered on beautiful rooms made me picture walls without memories. I told him I was fine, that my doctor said I was recovering well. He paused, then said softly, "We just want to make things easier for you." Easier? That word hung in my chest long after the call ended. Easier for whom? I spent that afternoon tending to the few plants I'd managed to bring to my rented room. The peace lilies drooped slightly. Too little light, too much waiting. I touched their leaves and whispered, "It's all right. We'll find our son again." The apartment felt hollow, but my voice filled it for a moment. By Sunday, Lena came to visit. It had been 3 weeks. She brought a box of muffins and her bright, polite smile. "You look good, Mom." "Rested," she said, as if she were complimenting a stranger. We sat by the window with tea. She talked about Mark's business and how they were managing things better now. I nodded, though something in me began to stir. A faint unease I tried to hush. "I was thinking," she said, stirring her tea, "maybe you could move closer to us. There's a lovely community center nearby with apartments for seniors, independent but safe. You'd love it," I smiled lightly. "You mean an assisted living place?" Her spoon clinked against the cup. "Well, not exactly. Just something easier to manage. You wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or bills. You could have more time for yourself." There it was again, that word. Easier. I let her talk, describing amenities and staff as if reading from a brochure. I wanted to believe she cared, that this was love shaped in practicality, but then she added, too casually, "Mark could help you sell the house, handle all the details. It's too much for you alone." I looked out the window to hide the tremor in my hand. "Thomas built that house," I said softly. "Every corner has his touch." Lena sighed. "I know, Mom. But you can't live off memories." Her words landed quietly, but they cut deep. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I just want what's best for you," she said, smiling the way people do when they're convincing themselves. That night, after she left, I sat with my tea until it went cold. Outside, streetlights flickered, and I thought about Thomas. When he was alive, Lena adored him. She'd follow him everywhere, pretending to help fix things around the house. He used to say, "She'll take care of you when I can't." I had believed him. Weeks turned into months. Calls grew shorter, visits rarer. When she did come, Mark was usually with her, always pleasant, always helpful, offering to organize my finances, review my medical insurance, just to keep things simple. I let him. It seemed harmless, and I was tired of worrying about paperwork, but slowly I noticed things changing. My bank envelopes stopped arriving. Mark said he'd switched everything to online for convenience. He'd hand me summaries, printed neatly, never the originals. I didn't ask questions. Trust can make you blind that way. It lets you trade awareness for comfort. One Sunday, they invited me to dinner at their home. I was happy for the company. Emma was there, quiet with her tablet, barely looking up. I brought a pie, as I always did. The conversation flowed easily at first, small talk, work, weather, the kind of safe chatter families rely on when they've run out of truth. Then in the middle of dessert, Mark said, "You know, Mom, we were just talking about estate planning. We want to make sure everything's in order for when the time comes. Saves everyone from headaches later." Lena laughed too quickly. "Yes, inheritance headaches," she said, tapping her fork on the plate. "We'll need a whole team of lawyers for you, Mom." They both laughed. I smiled because that's what you do when you don't understand the joke, but sense it's about you. The laughter didn't sound real. It sounded rehearsed, like a play they'd practiced. I excused myself early. In the hallway, I paused by a framed photo, Thomas holding Emma when she was a baby. His smile was warm, unguarded. My reflection in the glass looked different, older, smaller, unsure. Driving home, the laughter echoed in my head. I told myself I was overthinking, that love doesn't vanish overnight. But when I reached my door, the quiet inside felt colder than usual. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the folder of bills Mark had reorganized. Every page was neatly aligned, too neat. Something had shifted. I couldn't name it yet, but I could feel it in my bones, the same way you feel a storm before you see the clouds. Still, I prayed that night, the same prayer I always said, keep them safe, keep them kind. But part of me already knew. Sometimes prayers don't change people. They prepare you for what they're about to do. The morning of my surgery was calm, too calm in hindsight. The sky outside the hospital window was pale gray, the kind of color that looks like it's holding its breath. Lena helped me check in, her voice bright and cheerful. "You'll be out in no time, Mom," she said. Mark stood behind her, hands in his pockets, phone never leaving his grasp. I remember thanking them both for taking time off work. Lena brushed my hair back, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't worry about a thing." "We'll stay until they move you to recovery," I believed her. When the anesthesiologist asked me to count backward from 10, her face was the last thing I saw, blurry but smiling, familiar, safe. When I woke up, the room was empty. The clock on the wall said 4:15 p.m. The nurse, Bailey again, kind eyes behind tired glasses, was checking the monitors. "Welcome back, Mrs. Hart," she said softly. "How do you feel?" "Fine," I murmured. "My daughter? Is she in the waiting area?" Bailey's expression flickered, just for a second. "She and her husband left a few hours ago," she said gently. "They said they had something urgent but would come back." It took a moment for her words to settle. "They left?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They said not to worry. They took care of the bill and would pick up your things." Something cold moved through me. "My bag?" "Gone," Bailey said, glancing toward the corner. "Your coat, too." "They said they'd bring them back tomorrow." That word sounded uncertain. When Bailey left to check on another patient, I turned my head toward the window. The sun had started to set, painting the walls a tired gold. I told myself not to panic. Maybe they'd gone to get food. Maybe something had come up. Families do that. They forget time. Then I noticed my phone was missing. The charger was still plugged in beside the bed, cord hanging loose like a question mark. A nurse brought a voicemail slip a few minutes later. "Your daughter called earlier." The front desk wrote it down since your phone was off. The message was short, just one sentence written in tidy script. "Mom, we had to leave. Something came up. Don't worry, we took care of everything." I read it twice. The handwriting didn't even look rushed. When Bailey returned, I asked her about the bill. She hesitated, tapping at the computer. It says payment is still pending. It looks like they told admitting it was covered, but there's no card on file." I stared at the blanket over my lap, tracing the thin blue lines with my fingers. "It's all right," I said quietly. "Please call me a cab when it's time to go." "Are you sure?" "I can call your daughter again." "Not today," I whispered. "She's probably busy." I tried to rest, but rest doesn't come easily when your world starts tilting. I kept hearing Mark's voice in my head, soft and reassuring. "We'll handle everything." I should have known what that meant. When the discharge nurse came with the final forms, I reached for my wallet out of habit. It wasn't there. My ID cards, everything had been in the bag Lena took for convenience. Bailey frowned when I explained. "That's strange," she said. "We can run a temporary file, but you'll need to sign some replacement forms." She handed me the pen, and as I signed, my hands were steady, steadier than I expected. Shock has a way of numbing pain before it hits. "Would you like to wait in the lounge?" she asked gently. "No, I'd like to sit by the window outside." The hospital parking lot gleamed under the last strip of daylight. I watched the cars come and go, families arriving, laughing, bringing flowers. One woman pushed her mother's wheelchair, a child trailing behind, holding balloons. I smiled faintly. That used to be me and Lena once, when Thomas had his surgery years ago. She'd refused to leave his side then. She'd slept in that same chair I was sitting in now. People change, I thought, or maybe they just reveal who they've always been when love stops being useful. When the cab came, Bailey helped me to the door. "Please call if you need anything," she said, squeezing my hand. "I will," I lied. The cab driver asked for my destination, and the words stumbled out, Hartfield Lane. My old address, home. I corrected myself quickly. "Sorry, Maple Street Apartments." As we drove, I kept thinking about the keys, how casually Lena had taken them the last time she visited. "Let me hang on to these," she'd said, "so if anything happens, I can get in." I had smiled then, grateful for her thoughtfulness. We passed familiar streets, places I used to shop, the bakery where I'd buy Emma's favorite cookies. Everything looked the same, but it felt like another life. When I reached my room, I sat down slowly and opened the hospital envelope. It contained discharge forms, a copy of my insurance card, and a note from the billing office, outstanding balance due within 10 business days. My throat tightened, but not from fear, from clarity. I pulled open the drawer of the small desk. Inside was a folder I'd brought from home, the one with my account statements. I flipped through the pages, scanning lines that no longer made sense. Balances missing, withdrawals I didn't remember making, transfers with my initials typed in the memo field. My breath slowed. The room felt too still, the kind of stillness that comes before realization breaks everything apart. I called the bank. After 3 transfers, a polite voice told me my accounts had been closed the previous week. "All funds transferred to a joint account under authorization of power of attorney," she said. "Whose authorization?" I asked, though I already knew. "Mark Reynolds," she replied. The rest of the call blurred. I thanked her, hung up, and sat perfectly still. They had emptied everything, my savings, my home, even the small account Thomas and I had set up for Emma's college fund. I stood and walked to the window. The city below looked ordinary, people moving, buses humming, children laughing, life indifferent as ever. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. The reflection staring back wasn't the woman I remembered. My eyes looked older, sharper. It wasn't grief I felt anymore. It was understanding. For years, I'd believed kindness was enough, that if you gave love freely, it would always circle back. But love, I realized, can be taken and twisted by those who never learned its meaning. I sat down again, my hand steady as I pulled a piece of paper from the drawer. I wrote a note to myself, neat and calm. "Find Margaret Ruiz, Thomas's old friend, the one he trusted with our wills and business papers." I remembered her warm voice at his funeral, her hand on my shoulder. "He built everything to last, Evelyn," she'd said, "even his promises." I folded the note and slipped it into the folder. Then I turned off the light, letting the room fall into quiet. The betrayal had cut deep, but for the first time since the hospital, I didn't feel powerless. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had no idea what I still had left. The first night after the truth came out, I didn't sleep. I just sat at the little table in my rented room, the envelope of documents open beside me. The city outside never stopped humming. Cars, sirens, voices. But in my head, there was only silence. Not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind that settles in when something breaks quietly inside you. I kept telling myself to cry, to scream, to feel something. but nothing came. Just stillness. It was strange. The calm felt heavier than anger, like I'd already used up every emotion over the years without realizing it. I made tea at dawn. The steam curled upward, catching a thin ray of sunlight. My hands shook a little as I lifted the cup, but I forced myself to steady it. Thomas used to say, "Control begins with the hands, Evie." "The heart follows later," I repeated it in my mind, like a prayer. Later that day I found an old shoebox in my suitcase, filled with letters, the kind that yellow at the edges. Thomas's handwriting danced across the pages, smooth and sure. I hadn't opened them since the funeral. The first letter began, "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. And if I know you, you're worrying too much." I smiled a little. That was him, practical, funny, and always one step ahead of my fears. He wrote about the house, about how he built it not as property but as promise. "This home isn't just walls, Evelyn. It's proof we made something honest in a world that cuts corners." I traced the ink with my finger. That house, our house when it was gone now, sold under my name, its foundation paid for by hands that no longer remembered love. I read another letter. It was from the first year of our marriage, written after a fight I'd long forgotten. "When you forgive me," he'd written, "don't do it because I deserve it. Do it because you refuse to live in bitterness forgiveness." The word didn't feel possible yet, but something about it reminded me that my story didn't have to end here. That afternoon, I walked past my old street. My steps slowed as I reached the familiar mailbox with the chipped blue paint. The garden was trimmed, neat, not the way I'd kept it, but clean, efficient. Through the window I saw a family moving boxes. A little boy ran across the living room, laughing. I recognized none of them. My chest tightened, but no tears came. Instead, a kind of quiet clarity settled in. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a place where love once lived, and love, once betrayed, never returns the same way. I turned back toward the street, my reflection flashing across the car window as I passed. For a second, I didn't see a broken woman. I saw someone awake. At the market, I bought a small notebook and a pen. Back in my room, I opened to the first page and wrote the date. Then I began listing everything I remembered: conversations, bank withdrawals, visits, signatures, every detail I could recall. Not revenge, not yet. Just record-keeping, my own version of truth. By evening, I had filled half the notebook. My handwriting stayed steady, almost graceful. The act of writing made me feel anchored, as if each line built a small fence around the chaos. That night, I sat by the window and looked at the street below. A woman was helping her elderly mother out of a taxi. They laughed as they climbed the steps together, arms linked. I envied them for a moment, not because I lacked love, but because I'd given so much of it to people who didn't know its worth. I made another cup of tea and opened one last letter. This one was short. "If they forget what family means," Thomas had written, "remind them through how you live." I closed my eyes. That line stayed with me, circling in my thoughts like a slow echo. The next morning, I went to the public records office. It took 3 hours of waiting, but when I left, I carried a manila folder, copies of the property transfer, bank statements, and power of attorney documents. Mark's name appeared again and again, his signature too perfect to be honest. I returned to my room, laid everything on the table, and stared at it. My pulse didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I just felt ready. I sorted the documents into piles: house, accounts, insurance. I labeled each one with sticky notes. Then I placed Thomas's letters on top. They weren't evidence, but they were purpose. That night, I wrote something new in the notebook. They left me once. They won't leave unchanged. When I looked at those words, I didn't feel hate. I felt direction. Over the next week, I began visiting places Thomas once mentioned: the local bank, the courthouse, the library. The people there didn't remember him, but they remembered his reputation. "A fair man," one clerk said, "didn't cheat anyone." That small sentence felt like a lantern in the dark. In the quiet of my evenings, I began piecing together the map of what they'd done: the fraud, the transfers, the lies. And slowly, a new feeling began to grow where the pain used to sit. It wasn't revenge yet, it was understanding, the kind that carries weight but not heat. By the end of that week, my notebook was almost full. Each page felt like a step closer to something honest again. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake, and that was more dangerous to them than rage could ever be. Before going to bed that night, I took out the first letter again and whispered, "You were right, Thomas. I'm not broken. I'm just getting ready." Outside, the moonlight fell across the desk, lighting up the stack of papers, the proof, the betrayal, and the plan, all resting neatly in a pool of soft light. And in that stillness, I finally understood. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like documentation. I met Margaret Ruiz on a Thursday morning when the air smelled like rain. She had been Thomas's colleague years ago, the quiet mind behind many of his careful choices. Her office sat above a row of sycamores. A chipped mug on her desk read, "Steady hands." "Evelyn," she said, hugging me. "He talked about you. How are you holding up?" "I am steady," I said, "and I am done being surprised." I set my notebook on her desk and the folder of copies beside it. She slid on her glasses, read in silence, and tapped the stack square. "You documented everything." "I wrote what I could prove and marked what I could not," I said. "I am ready to learn the rest. Then we begin." For an hour she asked simple questions, dates, names, times, who answered the phone, where I stood. When I did not know, I said so. She never rushed me. She wrote as if each fact were a small nail securing a board. At last she leaned back. "Mark used a power of attorney to act in your name. He likely had you sign it among other papers when you were tired or grieving." "I remember a pile," I said. "He said it would make things easier." "That word hides knives," she murmured. She pulled a thin folder from her cabinet. "This is the one on file. You did sign it. But he crossed its limits. How?" "He used it to sell the house and move funds for his benefit. That is abuse and fraud." She opened a long envelope and slid a document toward me. "And Thomas set up an irrevocable trust 10 years ago. You are the sole beneficiary while you live, and the executor with conditional power over future distributions." I read the line 3 times. Conditional power? If an heir harms you, neglects you, or uses your name for gain, you may reduce, delay, or reroute that heir's share to charity. Your decision stands unless a judge finds you unfit. She met my eyes. "You are not unfit." Wind moved the leaves like a slow wave. I thought of Lena's joke about inheritance headaches, how wrong it had sounded in my bones. "Thomas," I whispered, "you careful man." "Trusts are houses made of paper," Margaret said. "He built you a sturdy one." Grief lifted and something clear remained. "I do not want to destroy my daughter," I said. "I want her to learn. I want to trust her again." "That is a higher aim," Margaret said. "It takes patience." "I have patience," I said, "and time." We weighed the paths. Court could punish, not teach. Public shaming could sting, then fade. Neither felt right. My heart wanted education, not spectacle. "What would a lesson look like?" she asked. "It would make them care for what they ignored. It would make them see me as a person, not a door to money. It would bind their hands to acts of care until their hearts woke or they lost what they chased. Then we will use the trust as a teacher." She drew a clean page and gave me a pen. "What does care look like?" "Respect for my choices," I said. "My keys in my hand, my schedule honored, honest bill updates, food in my kitchen, rides when I ask, no talk of placing me anywhere." She wrote each as a line and left space. "Now proof." How will we know? Photos with timestamps, signed checklists, weekly video calls, receipts in my name, bank alerts copied to your office. A medical binder that stays with me good. We will turn lines into conditions. Over 2 hours, we built a contract, simple to read and hard to fake. Lena and Mark would propose a family business to fund. The trust would offer a starting grant, held in escrow for 6 months. During that time, they must maintain my independence and well-being. If they failed, the escrow and their house would transfer to a named charity. If they kept every promise, the grant would release, and a modest stream of support would remain, tied to care. "It is generous," Margaret said. "It is a mirror," I said. We added a clause against resentment turned into neglect. If I missed 2 meals because they forgot, it counted as failure. If I waited more than 30 minutes after a promised ride, failure. If guilt, threats, or isolation appeared, failure. The goal was not to trap them. The goal was to make care concrete. At noon, she ordered soup from the cafe. Rain began. Cars hissed on the wet street. When we finished, she slid the papers into a blue folder. "We will not ambush them," she said. "We will invite them." "Yes," I said. "Invitations teach." "Do you want to be present when we present the plan?" "I want to look my daughter in the eyes," I said. "I will not argue. I will state the terms and the reason." "What is the reason?" she asked, though she knew. "So that love can live like truth," I said, "not like a loan." She closed her pen. "Here is your script." Plain words, calm voice. We practiced. She read Mark's likely objections in a flat tone. I answered with 1 sentence each. "I will not discuss the past today. These terms protect my independence. Accept or decline, both are choices." Before I left, Margaret opened a drawer and took out a small silver key. "For a safe box downstairs. Originals go there. You carry copies." I turned the key in my hand. It was cool and solid. "Steady hands," I said. "Steady hands," she agreed. I walked into the rain without an umbrella. The drops were cold, but I did not mind. I felt clean. On the bus, I watched people stare at their phones and thought about attention. For 6 months, Lena and Mark would have to spend attention where it mattered. Back in my room, I dried my hair and sat at the table. I opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote, "Lesson plan." I listed each condition in human words below the legal ones: a hot meal shared, a ride that arrives on time, a week with no talk of simplifying me out of my life. I did not imagine failure or triumph. I imagined practice. The rain slowed. The room smelled like wet sidewalks and soap. Tomorrow we would call Lena. Tomorrow the offer would be made. Tonight I would sleep. I closed the notebook and whispered into the quiet, "Class begins." Lena came to the meeting first, 10 minutes late, holding her purse like a shield. Mark followed, phone in hand, polite smile fixed tight. Margaret's office was bright that morning, sunlight spilling through the blinds in careful stripes. I sat at the table with tea already poured, 1 cup for each of us. "Mom," Lena said, breathless, "you look well." "Well enough," I said. "Sit down." Mark leaned forward, charm already at work. "We're just glad to see you, Evelyn." "We've been worried. There's been a lot of confusion since everything." "Yes," I said. "There has." Margaret greeted them warmly, but didn't waste time. "Thank you both for coming. Mrs. Hart and I have discussed a family proposal that might benefit everyone." Lena's eyes brightened at the word benefit. "Oh? What kind of proposal?" "It's about a family business opportunity," Margaret said. "Funding, property management, and long-term support under a legal framework that honors your late father's trust." I could see Mark trying to calculate the meaning behind every word. "Thomas Hart's trust?" he asked. "Yes," Margaret said smoothly. "A rather generous one." He relaxed slightly, leaning back in his chair. Lena smiled at me, her tone almost playful. "Mom, that's wonderful." I didn't know Dad left anything beyond the insurance. "Neither did I said, my voice calm. "But apparently he planned for every season, even this one." Margaret slid a folder across the table. "The trust allows Evelyn to create a family-run initiative, a small business or charitable program that benefits all parties, provided its terms are upheld." Mark opened the folder, flipping through pages. 6 months of co-management, performance clauses, care requirements. He frowned. "I'm sorry. What's this section about maintaining her well-being?" "That," Margaret said, "is the condition of eligibility. The trust releases its funds only if Mrs. Hart's personal and financial independence are preserved. and if those closest to her ensure her comfort and dignity during the evaluation period, Lena's smile faltered. Wait, you mean we'd be taking care of Mom as part of the deal? I met her eyes. Yes. As part of the family business, Mark gave a small, dry laugh. This is unusual. So we act as caregivers, and at the end get paid? Not paid, Margaret corrected. Trusted. The trust's funds transition into a shared estate only if the terms are met. Failure results in forfeiture to charity, Lena blinked. Charity? Specifically, Margaret said, the Hart Community Fund, a nonprofit in Evelyn's name that supports elderly homeowners. It's already registered. Mark's jaw tightened. And if we don't agree, then nothing changes, I said. You keep what you've built. I keep what remains mine. We simply closed this conversation. Lena reached for my hand. Mom, that's not fair. We love you. Of course we'll take care of you. Then there's nothing to worry about, I said softly. Margaret outlined the logistics, weekly check-ins, documentation of meals, appointments, and calls, a shared account for household expenses, fully transparent, every receipt signed by both parties. She mentioned a well-being audit at the 3-month mark. Mark nodded politely, but his eyes had narrowed into calculation. And if something happens to Evelyn during this time? The trust includes a clause for continuity, Margaret said. In the event of her passing, distribution still depends on compliance with the care conditions up to that date. There's no advantage in waiting her out, Mr. Reynolds. He smiled thinly. Of course. I sipped my tea. The taste was faintly bitter. This isn't punishment, I said. It's an opportunity to begin again, properly this time. Lena looked down at her hands. It just feels formal. Like you don't trust us, I don't, I said gently. But I'd like to. The room was quiet for a moment, except for the faint tapping of rain against the window. Then Margaret added, Shall I prepare the agreement for signatures? Mark hesitated, glancing at Lena. We'll need time to review this. Of course, I said. 6 months is a long time to plan for one's conscience. When they left, Lena hugged me. It was brief, uncertain. We'll do this, Mom. You'll see. We'll make it right. I hope so, I whispered. 2 days later, they accepted. Margaret sent over the final contract, signed and notarized. The trust activated immediately. The first week was full of careful politeness. Mark called every morning at 9. Just checking in, Evelyn, he'd say, voice perfectly measured. How are we today? We, I'd answer, smiling faintly. I'm fine. Lena brought groceries, each bag neatly labeled. She cooked dinners and insisted I rest. I let her, though I noticed she always took pictures. Meals, medicine bottles, tidy rooms. Proof, not care. On the 3rd week, I received a call from Margaret. Routine check, she said. How are they managing? They're trying, I said, but they confuse duty with devotion. Give it time, she said. The mirror hasn't shown them their reflection yet. By month 2, the strain began to show. Mark started missing visits. Work emergencies, he'd say. The weekly checklists arrived late, sometimes unsigned. Lena filled them in with shaky handwriting. One afternoon, I overheard them arguing in the kitchen. This is ridiculous, Mark snapped. I feel like we're babysitting her for an allowance. She's my mother, Lena said quietly. She's testing us, he hissed. You think she'll really hand it over? I stepped softly into the hallway. If you're speaking about me, I said, you could ask instead of guessing. Mark turned, caught off guard. Evelyn, we didn't mean... Intentions are like receipts, I said. Keep them. You'll need them later. He said nothing. Lena looked down, shame flickering in her eyes. After that, they became careful again. Too careful. Flowers on the table, new curtains in my room, polite smiles. But sincerity can't hide behind routine forever. At the 3-month review, Margaret joined us for lunch. The table was full. Roast chicken, salad, pie, all arranged beautifully. Margaret observed quietly, taking notes. How has it been? She asked. Enlightening, I said. Lena tried to smile. We've been learning to communicate better. Wonderful, Margaret said. Mrs. Hart, any concerns? I met her gaze. "None today," I said, "but lessons take time." When Margaret left, Mark exhaled sharply. "I think she's watching us like hawks." "She is," I said. "That's her job." His jaw tightened. "And yours?" I smiled, gentle as ever. "To live well." By month 5, their patience thinned. Mark began calling Margaret with clarifications. Lena missed one of the welfare visits entirely. I noted everything in my logbook, every missed meal, every broken promise, every hour of silence that followed an apology. And yet I didn't feel angry. I felt composed. Each day they showed me what they valued most: convenience over conscience, control over connection. When the final month began, Margaret came by again. "Are you ready for the closeout?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "The lesson is nearly complete." "Will you forgive them?" I looked out the window at the fading autumn leaves. Forgiveness is for those who finish the course. That night, I wrote a new entry in my notebook. The heart learns through effort, not inheritance. The 6th month began with frost on the lawn and geese over the lake. I woke early, made tea, and opened my notebook. I wrote one line. "Today, the mirror turns." I did not mean a harsh mirror, only the kind that shows a face in honest light. The first welfare check was simple. A young caseworker named Dana arrived at 10 with a list. "This is routine," she said. "We confirm food, medication, transport, and contact." I showed her the pantry, the calendar, and the folder of receipts. She saw the gaps. "Who shopped last week? The register tape shows nothing." "Lena planned to come," I said. "She had to reschedule." I did not add that reschedule had turned into silence and a midnight text of flowers. "And your physical therapy?" she asked. "Missed twice," I said. "I exercised at home." She nodded, wrote a note, and thanked me. That afternoon, Lena called. "Mom, how was the little visit?" "Efficient," I said. "Great. Mark says we're almost through this." "I know," I said. We were almost through something, though not the same thing. The second check came unannounced. Margaret arranged it after a pattern formed in the logs. Dana returned with an older officer in a sweater. He asked, "Who manages your money?" "I do," I said, opening the ledger in my hand. "Who arranged the sale of your former house?" "My son-in-law," I said. "He used papers I signed when grieving." I did not understand. "Do you have proof?" "I have dates," I said, "and a copy of my signature that is not mine." They left with copies. They asked for facts, not feelings. I was grateful for the shape of facts. That evening, Mark appeared with takeout and loud charm. "Tie night," he said. "We're spoiling you." "It's kind of you," I said. He ate quickly, praised his thoughtfulness, then pulled out a pen. "Let's sign the weekly checklist now." "We sign at the end of the week," I said. He smiled too widely. "Of course." After dessert, "You didn't bring any," I said. He laughed, left with the extra curry, and did not return that week. When the third visit happened, it was called an investigation. 2 county officials came with Dana and Margaret. They sat at my table. Margaret laid out a binder. Notes, trust reports, checklists, messages, missing signatures. The officials listened, turned pages, wrote. "Did you request a lock change on your former house?" one asked. "No," I said. "My keys were taken at the hospital." "By whom?" "I was told Lena picked them up for safety." I kept my voice even. I did not feel safe. They thanked me and left. Margaret squeezed my hand. "You were brave." "I was clear," I said. "Bravery is for fires. Clarity is for paper." 2 days later, a headline appeared. "Local couple under review for elder neglect. Possible real estate fraud." The article said alleged, but truth hummed beneath it. Neighbors knocked softly. I brewed tea and asked about their gardens. I chose to attend to the living, not the noise. Lena called, "Mom, did you see that trash?" "I saw a report," I said. "Reports are pages that want light." "They're wrong," she said. "We love you." "I know you love me," I said. "Love is not the same as care." She cried. When her breath steadied, I said, "Come over. Drink water first." She arrived with red eyes, smaller than usual. "Mark says it will blow over," she whispered. "The wind stops," I said. "But fallen things stay where they fall unless someone lifts them." She nodded and repeated his story, that a system had misread a family. Many prefer being misread to being untrue. A week later, a formal notice arrived. Temporary freeze on Mark's company accounts, properties under review, including my old house. I read it, placed it under Thomas's brass paperweight, swept the kitchen, and watered my fern. "Small, clean tasks keep the soul steady," a reporter asked for comment. I handed her one sentence on a card. "No interviews. I trust the process." The investigation widened. Emails surfaced. A notary admitted she had stamped papers she had not seen signed. A junior banker recalled a call that did not feel right. People who once nodded to Mark began to look past him. Near month's end, Margaret arrived with a man in a navy suit from the title company. "We're prepared to unwind the transfer," he said. The buyer did not know. "Restitution is available." "Good," I said. "Please keep the buyer whole." He blinked. "That is our goal." "My goal, too," I said. "No one should lose more than their part in the error." He left with respect he had not brought. Lena stopped coming for a week, then came twice in one day. She brought soup and left without the jar. "Mom, this is humiliating," she said. "Humility is different," I said. "Humiliation is from others. Humility is the lesson you accept from yourself." She stared at the floor. "Mark says we should countersue." "For what?" I asked. "For stress," she said, and winced. That night I walked to the dock. The moon sat low like a coin on a table. I said Thomas's name into the cold air. Only water and wind answered. The final welfare check came on a Wednesday. Dana wore another blue scarf and smiled at the fern's new shoots. "It's thriving," she said. "So am I," said. She ticked boxes. "Any missed appointments?" "None." "Any unexplained withdrawals?" "No." "Contact with Miss Reynolds and Mr. Reynolds this week?" "Yes," I said. Short but honest. She signed and closed her folder. "Some people shout when they're wronged," she said. "You take very good notes." "I was a teacher," I said. "Lessons last longer when written down." 2 days later, county findings. Neglect substantiated. Fraud referred to the state. The trust terms, once theoretical, felt like firm shore after storm water pulled back. Margaret called. "We're ready for the close of the test." "Then the lesson is almost done," I said. News vans crawled past the lake. I baked for the community center and set up chairs. When someone asked how I was, I said, "Learning." On Sunday, I sat in the back pew at church. The pastor read about clean hands and a quiet heart. After the service, an old friend pressed my fingers. "You held the line," she whispered. I did not feel like a line. I felt like a door that had stayed on its hinges. The day before the final review meeting, Lena texted, "Can I come alone?" I answered yes. She arrived at dusk, hair pulled back, phone off. She stood in the doorway like a traveler who had at last read the map. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice did not shake. "And this time I will not explain myself." I put the kettle on. The water sang. I set out 2 cups and the honey jar Thomas had loved. Evening light reached across the table, as if it too wanted to listen. "Tell me," I said, and waited for the reckoning to begin now. The sun hung low over the lake that afternoon, stretching gold light across the rippling water. My cottage smelled faintly of lemon and soap, the quiet kind of clean that makes space for peace. I had just set out 2 cups when I heard her car on the gravel. Slow, hesitant, as if the tires themselves were ashamed. Lena stepped out carefully, holding a small paper bag. She looked thinner, smaller. The sharpness that once shaped her words had softened into exhaustion. Her voice trembled. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, Lena," I said, "and come in." Inside, she glanced around the cottage, eyes landing on the simple furniture, the photographs of Thomas on the mantel, the fern by the window. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It's enough," I replied. "Sit before the tea gets cold." She placed the bag on the table. "I brought blueberry scones." You used to bake them on Sundays. I smiled faintly. You remembered. For a few moments, we sat in silence. Two women who had shared a lifetime and now shared almost nothing. The kettle clicked softly in the background. She stirred her tea 3 times, just like I used to. Some habits survive distance. She looked down. They took the house. I know. They froze our accounts. Mark's company. Everything. I know that too. Her fingers tightened around the cup. Everyone talks about us like we're criminals. I can't walk into the store without hearing whispers. Truth has a voice, I said quietly. It carries farther than gossip. She exhaled, defeated. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Mark said it was temporary, that once things settled, we'd make it right. And did you believe him? She hesitated. I wanted to. He said you didn't need so much space anymore, that you'd be happier closer to people your age. I nodded slowly. I remember that line. Her eyes glistened. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself we were helping, and now? Now I see we were taking, she whispered. Taking what wasn't ours to take. The clock ticked softly, filling the stillness between us. I let her words settle, not to wound her, but to give them weight. You were raised in that house, I said. Every mark on the doorframe is your height at a different year. Every quilt on the bed was stitched for you. And yet you looked at all that and saw a transaction. Tears welled in her eyes. I was wrong. I know, I said, but wrong doesn't vanish when you cry. It fades when you learn. I've learned, she said quickly, almost pleading. Mark's gone. I filed for divorce. I'm starting over. I studied her face. It was older than I remembered, not just in years, but in humility. Do you want forgiveness? She shook her head. No, I just want you to know I understand now. What it means to lose someone who trusted you. I nodded. Then you already have half of what you need. We drank our tea in silence. Outside, the lake shimmered in silver light. Ducks moved across the water, calm and deliberate. After a while, she said, You always said love was unconditional. It is, I said. Trust isn't. Her lip trembled. I don't know how to earn that back. Not by rushing, I said. Time is a better teacher than guilt. You visit when you can, you keep your promises, and you stop rehearsing regret. That's how you start. She nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I reached for the paper bag. The scones were uneven, messy, too much flour on the edges, but warm. I broke one in half and passed it to her. You always overmix the dough, I said softly. She laughed through her tears. You always said I couldn't be patient with anything. I said you hadn't learned patience yet, I corrected. Now you have the chance. We sat there, chewing in quiet rhythm. The world outside the window looked steady again. After tea, she walked to the bookshelf. Her hand brushed the spine of Thomas's journals. I miss him, she said. He'd be proud of you today, I replied. She turned, startled. Proud? After everything? He believed people could find their way back, I said, even from deep shadows. Her voice dropped. Do you? I thought for a long moment. Belief is the easy part. Watching someone walk the path is harder. But yes, I believe. She stepped closer, uncertain, and then, carefully, placed her hand over mine. It was a daughter's gesture, not an apology, not a plea, just a quiet bridge. When she finally stood to leave, the sky had turned pink. Will I see you again soon? She asked. I hope so, I said. You know where to find me now? She nodded. Thank you for letting me come. I smiled. There's always tea here. But this time, you bring the patience. She laughed softly and walked to the door. The gravel crunched under her feet, fading with distance. When I closed the door, the house felt neither empty nor full, only balanced. I washed the cups, dried them, and placed them upside down on the counter. Through the window, I watched her car curve along the road and disappear beyond the trees. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt restored. Not because she came back, but because I had never truly left myself. I sat at my writing desk, opened my notebook, and wrote one final entry for the day. When love survives truth, it becomes wisdom. I underlined it once, then set the pen aside. The light from the lake caught on the glass, shimmering like forgiveness, quiet, unspoken, and whole. Morning light filtered through the wide windows of the community center. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and cinnamon rolls from the cafe next door. I walked slowly down the hallway, cane in hand, listening to the quiet hum of a place that was finally alive. On the wall near the entrance, a new brass plaque gleamed under the light, the Hart Foundation, a home for hope. Thomas's name was beneath mine. I traced the letters with my finger. "You always believed love should build something," I whispered. "Now it has." Every week, the center filled with faces that reminded me of my own reflection years ago. Older women carrying quiet heartbreak, men who had outlived their families, people who had been made invisible by time. They came here not just for food or legal advice, but for recognition, for belonging. That morning, a volunteer waved as I passed. "Good morning, Mrs. Hart," she said. "The donations came early. Do you want me to set up the hall?" "Yes," I smiled, "and bring the old piano from the storeroom." It still plays. It had belonged to me once. The same piano Lena used to tap at when she was little, missing half the notes but smiling through every wrong key. Now it stood in the center of the community room, its wood worn but proud. When I sat at the bench, my fingers hesitated above the keys. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but they still remembered. I played softly, the same hymn that had filled my old house years ago. The notes drifted through the empty hall, wrapping around the air like a memory that had forgiven itself. People began arriving, a dozen at first, then more. They sat in folding chairs, holding mugs of tea. The sound of quiet chatter filled the space. Every face carried a story: loss, endurance, resilience. When the song ended, I stood and spoke. "Welcome," I said. "This place exists because pain doesn't have to end where it began. It can turn into purpose." A few nodded, others wiped tears. I saw understanding, the kind that doesn't need explanation. I continued. "Years ago, I learned something difficult. When people leave you in your weakest moment, they don't just abandon you. They give you a mirror. You can look at it and see loss, or you can see truth. And truth, if you're brave enough, will show you where to rebuild someone." In the back whispered, "Amen." I smiled gently. I thought revenge would heal me once. But justice isn't punishment, it's clarity, the kind that lets you walk past what hurt you without flinching. I looked toward the door as it opened. Lena entered quietly, a folder in her hands. Her hair was pinned back, and her eyes met mine without fear this time. She worked here now, organizing supplies, coordinating volunteers. She didn't hide behind apologies anymore. She simply did the work. She smiled, and I nodded back. That was enough. The meeting began. Updates on repairs, new partnerships, an upcoming meal program. The details were small, but each one felt like a promise kept. When it ended, people stayed to talk, to laugh, to share. The room buzzed with soft life, the kind that doesn't need to prove its worth. Later, when the hall emptied, I sat alone by the piano again. The afternoon light fell in golden sheets across the floor. I thought of all that had been taken, and all that had quietly returned in different forms. I opened my journal, the same one I'd carried since the hospital, and wrote the final entry. "They left me when I was weakest. But strength grows best in silence. What they took showed me what I could build without them." I closed the book and exhaled. My story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about the quiet endurance that follows betrayal, the kind of power that doesn't shout, it simply continues. As I stood to leave, I turned off the lights one by one. Through the glass doors, the sunset stretched long across the lake, painting the sky in amber and rose. The reflection on the water looked almost like fire, the soft kind that warms, not burns. Before stepping outside, I spoke into the empty room, as if to the women who might one day stand here after me. "If they leave you when you're weakest," I said softly, "don't chase them. Let life teach them what your words couldn't. And when you find your strength again, use it to build something worth staying for." The doors closed behind me with a gentle click. Outside, the evening air was cool and kind. I walked down the path toward the lake, the sound of laughter from the community center fading behind me. My cane pressed softly into the gravel, each step steady, deliberate, certain. By the water's edge, I paused and looked at the horizon, one last time as the day folded into dusk. For a moment, I thought I could almost hear Thomas's voice again, low and warm. "You did it, Evie." I smiled. "We did," I whispered. And as the last light touched the water, I felt it, not forgiveness, not triumph, but peace. The kind that arrives quietly, sits beside you, and stays.